So, hi everybody, this is Joanna Michaels from The Lifting, and today we are actually going to have a very interesting conversation here about Japan history, Japan mythology, and the ancient ways of protection that the Japanese culture and mythology brought in. So today we have a wonderful person. This is Yasuki. He's here. He actually resides currently in the United Kingdom, but he's here in Japan with us now, and he has some very interesting information to share that we think you guys will all feel fascinated by regarding Japan history. And then of course Chris will always add in and see if he can bring in some galactics to talk about it as well. So today we are all going to learn about Japan. So I am going to turn it over to Chris Yasuki, and I'm going to bow out and listen myself.
All right, Yasuki, go right ahead.
Okay, so my understanding of this is obviously my own opinions, but I've tried to research as much as I can into the whole culture of the Shinto mythology. So a lot of people understand Shinto to be a religion, but after doing research into the subject, it's become apparent that it's not a religion as such. It's more like an ancient mythology, and the current religion called Shinto was stemmed from that mythology, but there are many other spiritual type forms that stemmed from the original Shinto mythology. So one of there's a few. So Shinto religion might be one of them. There's also a discipline called Onmyoji, which Onmyo means light and dark path. Shinto actually means the god path, but it's more taken from the ancient understanding of God, of beings that are not human, and these can include negative entities as well as positive entities, so it's a mix and match. There's also a group that work in the mountains called the Shugendo, and they've got their own sort of people that go around blessing mountains, protecting the mountains, and honouring the entities and the elementals and the spirits that reside within the mountains and the lakes and the nature. So perhaps maybe what I'll do is just sort of run through what was the history of how Japan developed its various cultures that eventually worked together to protect the land of Japan until recent times, where it started to get more and more corrupted. But hopefully there is a reversal of this towards the golden age that we are now working towards. So to begin with, one of the most important characters within the Shinto mythology is a man named Jimmu, the Emperor Jimmu, and Jimmu Emperor was the first emperor of Japan, and they say that his mother, he was a descendant, almost like a great grandson of the Shinto sun goddess Amaterasu, and Chris and I have spoken before about Amaterasu, briefly touched on it, and where Chris managed to find out that Amaterasu was actually an Ontamban being from Ontamba, and many Shinto sort of entities stem from this star system that Ontamba is part of. And but then there is also Mesopotamian deities that have made it into Japan, and a lot of Japanese culture, including the three treasures of Japan, the jewel, the sword, and the mirror. A few of them, I think, come from the Mesopotamian side as well, from ancient Sumer. And there is a god by the name of Susanoo, and this entity you were saying was a House of M, one of the brothers of Mikhail and Enlil and
Yes.
Odin and these people. So that's the being that first kind of is the central figure to the Shinto sort of mythology, is this Jinmu Emperor. Now, when after the Jinmu Emperor was, and I think the Jinmu Emperor came, made his way into Japan and led the people of Japan to the island in 561 AD, I believe, but I need to properly check up on that. But it was around that time, and it took about 500 years until the year 1000, when one of the most important members of this culture called Onmyoji, which we'll be talking about today, came into being. This person is, his name is Abe no Seimei, and in Japan he's quite a famous character, where they say that his mother was a yokai, a fox yokai. A yokai is sort of like a fairy folk. In Japan, in mythology, they say that after 100 years, a fox splits their tail into two. And then after 1,000 years, the tail splits into 9. And then after 3,000 years, they say the fox loses all its tails and becomes what you call a reibi. And the 9-tailed fox is a kyubi, the 2-tailed fox is a nibi, and the 1-tailed fox is a kitsune or a yoko. So there is a fairy folk version of a fox, if you like, and this was supposedly the mother of Abe no Seimei, and they say this was why Abe no Seimei developed such powerful magic, ether. So the Onmyoji started when Japan's emperor and the royal family started to be heavily influenced. This was much after the reign of Jinmu Emperor, probably several successions down the line, when the purity was sort of started to get lost, let's say, and Buddhists managed to make their way into Japan also. And Buddhism, I also understand to be a duality religion, where there are white magicians and black magicians working from both sides. What happened in around 1000 AD was, by then, there was a bit of a split between the Shinto and the Buddhist side of things, where the Buddhists, they supposedly had a lot of influence over the emperor. So at about 700 AD, the Onmyoji decided to move the emperor away from Nara, which was where the capital of Japan was, to Kyoto. And the main reason for that was to move the emperor away from the Buddhist black magicians. Of course, there are white magicians within Buddhism as well, but at that time, the black magicians had kind of influenced too much, according to Onmyoji texts. And they moved the capital to Kyoto, and the first Onmyoji who really made a difference in this was a man called Kamo. And Kamo created a line between Nara and Kyoto to separate the energies, and they would use ropes tied between structures to represent a line, a division of the land. And Kamo was an expert at keeping both good and bad entities out of a certain area, that he would set up these barriers. And eventually he would create many barriers until it was kind of ringing the city of Kyoto to separate it from other energies. But when they did that, they created sort of like a trap for entities. They could not leave, they could not come in. Both good and negative entities could not leave or enter. When this happened, Kyoto went through a stage where it was called a sort of like a demonic city. And every evening, all the people would have to kind of stay at home and barricade all their houses, because every evening there was a parade of demonic entities that would wander through the town, and they would manifest in 3D, in the third dimension. And it was because the energies got so heavily concentrated with that, the fairy folk demonic energies, and because it was all concentrated and trapped within this barrier, they would be able to manifest as they overpowered the presence of the humans in that space, in numbers, purely in terms of numbers. And it didn't start off like that. It started off after Kamo created these barriers around Kyoto. And Abe no Seimei was born during this time, when Kyoto was known as the Demon City. And Seimei would climb to the top of both the discipline of scholarship, as well as the discipline of Onmyoji, which combines magic as well as astrology, as well as mathematics, numerology, if you like. So all the occult disciplines into one. But there was nobody as powerful as Seimei in the Onmyoji sector at the time. There were people in the mountains before Seimei's era that were very good at curse magic, and they also were very powerful with being able to control, sort of like how King Solomon, and we spoke about this briefly, King Solomon used to control jinns with a ring. In a similar way, there were people in Japan before Seimei's time that were able to do this, and sort of not with a ring control jinn, but sort of the equivalent in the East, where they would use Shinto magic to sort of like capture negative entities and turn them to good, or if they don't, then they'll be eliminated. But if they would turn to the good side, or to do the bidding of the magician, then they would sort of become like the familiars of the magician at the time. So then Seimei's magic started to influence Kyoto at the time, and what he did was change the properties of these barriers to allow negative entities to leave and for positive entities to enter. And when he did that, over time, gradually, but over a small period of time, the negative entities stopped appearing. The demon parade stopped every night, and he was hailed as a hero in that time. He also had a rival and a best friend, if you like, a man called Ashiya Doman. And the Doman family and the Seimei family split their roles in Japan, so that the Doman would take the west of Japan, and Seimei would take the east of Japan. And what they did was set up these powerful barriers that kept negative entities out and positive entities in. And they started to build all sorts of these new systems of barriers. So one of them, for example, is what I've heard being called a barrier stone. And what they would do is quite similar to sort of like these kind of devices nowadays, but I realized that they've been doing this in other countries, including Japan, since a very long time ago. But I guess this is the more evolved, sort of developed technological version of what they used to do back in the day. So if you remember, back in the day there were no roads. So what these people had to do was they'd use powerful mountains where the ley lines would cross. And they would set up these really massive boulders at the top of these mountains. Maybe 3, 4, 5 mountains joined together, and they would link them up with intent. And with the barrier stones, what they would usually use is a jadeite, and some of the whitest of the jadeite, not the green, but the whitest. And they would program it with the spell, the white magic spell, and they would put it inside the barrier stone by digging a small pit within the stone, and mixing it with clay, sand, and the material that was extracted to make the pit. Mash it all up and sort of like set it with the jadeite in the pit, they'd set it within this pit, and sort of it would set, and it would sort of be like almost like how orgonite or concrete or something might work, and then the magic would be transferred to the bigger boulder, which will then connect with the mountain and the ley line, and it will create a much more superior protection. And they'd set up 5 of these around Kyoto, or that's what Abe no Seimei did. And Seimei's magic still is existent to this day, and even after 1,000 years, some of these barriers that he had made, according to his descendants, are incredibly powerful. His descendants eventually sort of split off into various different parts of Japan after that, but there's a slight story to that. What happened was Seimei, after he passed away, well, before he passed away, he left children behind, descendants. So there was the main Seimei family, which is the main family, and then there's 5 sub-families that he had created. And in Shinto, there is a very important understanding called Gogyo, which is the idea of the 5 elements, but in the East. So in the West, we'd say earth, wind, fire, water, and ether is the 5 elements in the West. In the East, the understanding was slightly different. It's Mokka Do Gon Se, which is wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And the idea was that the fire helps the wood helps the fire then helps the earth then helps the metal, and the metal then helps the water. And it's kind of like the similar concept in the East, in the West, but a slightly different take from the East. And based on that principle, Seimei had created 5 other lineages: the water family, the earth family, the fire family, the metal family, and the wood family. And these families would surround the city of Kyoto, with the main family in the middle, located in the middle of Kyoto. And there's 5 families that have their homes located on these kekkai points, the barrier points. And each house sort of became a barrier, of a pillar of protection. And they've got a barrier stone in their backyard, and whenever the Onmyoji of that household, of that bloodline, passes away, they choose not to get cremated, but they get buried underneath the barrier stone, so that they can protect the land of Kyoto even after death. It's sort of like a duty of protecting Japan. Okay. So they willingly did this, and eventually, after Seimei had passed away, these 5 sub-houses had decided, the 5 sub-houses and the 1 main family had decided to spread the kekkais all over Japan. And when they did that, they attracted the attention of very powerful people, such as the emperor, realized how powerful this was. The Onmyodo eventually became a sort of like a government body, if you like, at the time. And they were hired by many different people to set up barriers around castles, and many temples and shrines in Japan are actually barriers, and they provide a cornerstone or a pillar, central pillar to a barrier that protects the land around. And the main reason why the families had spread out so much, because sure, there were areas that needed to be protected, but now what we have now in Japan is shrines and temples everywhere. That only happened when the Sengoku period kicked off. The Sengoku period is the civil war of Japan, and back then what happened was these generals would emerge from different lands claiming ownership of the country, to say, I am the leader, the supreme leader type deal. But then each of these generals would then ask one of the Onmyoji to build a barrier around their castle. And what eventually happened was they would sort of be working against each other, even if they're the same family. So one Onmyoji would be working for one general, another would be working for another general, and if the two generals were to go to war, then those two Onmyojis would help each general to try to win the war. Of course, over time, it became kind of known that if you wanted to take out a general, the easiest way to do it would be to take out the Onmyoji, who is protecting him spiritually. And so a lot of Onmyoji died back then, and because of those deaths, the main household families decided to give training, protection training. So they taught them martial arts and all sorts of techniques to defend themselves physically. And when they did that, that was the birth of what you call ninjas. Ninjas, their culture stems all the way back from Onmyoji. And if you notice the Japanese football team now, for example, they have a crest on their left chest with a three-legged crow. And the three main families of the three main ninja families in Japan use this symbol as their crest, the three-legged crow. And the three-legged crow is a Japanese mythological creature that guided the first emperor to the land of Japan. Now, I'm not sure what the history of Jimmu Emperor is before he got to Japan, but it was this crow, the three-legged crow, that managed to get there. So the ninjas had used that as their inspiration to use as their crest, and it seems like they still are prevalent to this day in some manner, albeit in the shadows. And eventually, after when the Civil War started to get wrapped up, there was one general that won the war, as many Japanese people know. His name is Tokugawa Ieyasu, and the general Ieyasu had basically had a Onmyoji protecting him the whole time, but this guy was not a good guy. His name was Tenkai. Tenkai was obsessed with winning the war for the general. So he did not mind betraying his own kind. So his Onmyoji background, he didn't mind crushing some of them just for him to win and succeed and help his general to succeed. Eventually, they all won the war through sort of black magic tactics. And when they won the war, they set up sort of the current understanding rules of Japan to this day. It's slowly evolved from there because it was during the Meiji period, and as we know, the Meiji Emperor, that is where the corruption first was inserted into the Japanese bloodline. When and at the moment there are strong rumors going around throughout Japan that especially in the underground secret sort of society communities, that the Meiji Emperor had his mother was a Habsburg princess from Germany. So this is where the Rothschild bloodline had invaded the Japanese royal bloodline, and it was from there that things really began to change for the negative side in Japan, which led to the war, the Second World War, and all that stuff. As you know, the emperor before Meiji had decided to stop any trade or shipping arrangements with other countries and Japan. So they had what you call sakoku, which is to completely stop any foreign influence into Japan, in and out. And it was the Meiji Emperor, the Habsburg princess's son, who decided to open up Japan for trade with European countries, for war to start brewing in Japan, let's say. So that's where the corruption really began. But I like to think that things are moving away from this bloodline now. But that's an overall take on how Japan sort of got protected, and then some of the protection was sort of corrupted. And it's interesting when you think it was during that Meiji period that a lot of kekkais had sort of started to become vandalized. And this is quite similar to what happens with Stonehenge or other sacred sites around the world that were built as protection, but then people would vandalize them. And it's not a coincidence that they would be vandalized at these sort of times, as above, so below. So I think one of the most vandalized Shinto barrier stones and shrines is along the shores, and Shinto Onmyojis and Yamabushi from the Shugendo, all these different cultures that were trying to protect Japan together. They were they say that it's the ones that were trying to keep the foreign influence away from Japan, the barriers that were set up for that purposes, that were the ones that were targeted the most to be destroyed. So the spiritual protection was first taken down bit by bit, and then things like that started to manifest. So that's my understanding of what we have today in Japan.
Yeah, so I find it interesting, and maybe I'll come back in for a second, because, when I heard bits and pieces, not as intently as right now, earlier one day when we were having lunch, and what I find interesting is the pattern, because, the one thing that we've said, again, and I'll say it again, we're here with a learning experience of going from darkness to light. So there has to be the contrast of not having it so good, things going bad, in order to now contrast coming out of it. So what I find interesting in societies, and again, it's no different than, when we talk about ancient civilizations, Mu, or Lemuria, Atlantis, there's always a pattern that emerges of how what I call the darkness creeps in. And it's very subtle. But to me, this again highlights the same thing that's happened in all societies. It actually, although the Japanese people got to the point where they were focused on, I can't allow foreigners in, that's where it's coming from. But if you really tease it out, it actually starts from within first, because here you had people who had the inner skills of being able to fight off darker entities, something we're actually all have, we just have forgotten how to do it. And then what happens is that it gets divided among people who the misnomer occurs that I can do this, but you just can't quite do this. I can do this, but you can't. And then what always seems to happen is that darkness innervates that. And so now you've got the point that in religions, and it happens in multiple, where you take something good and then it gets innervated, because the one thing the darkness had to do is to keep us from spiritually growing. They had to attack that aspect of life. In every culture, they had to attack it. And so they go in, they start to separate people. I can do this, you can't do this. And then they innervate certain religions, and then everybody starts to become vulnerable. And so then you've got these protectors who now are, instead of protecting as a unit, they're protecting separately. And then there's for and against, and there's fighting that starts to occur inside. And it's very, very subtle. But it all began with this thought process that people didn't remember, that everyone has the ability to fight off darkness with certain skills, and everyone forgot that they had them. Then it became separatists. You can, I can't, you're important, I'm just a worker, and I have to rely on you. And once you get to the point of it's not coming from the inside and you're having to rely on someone else, that's where the corruption can begin. Mm-hmm. It's every single society. It's how it's always happened.
Yeah, and when you were talking about Kyoto and the whole setting up the barriers to where things were trapped within there, and the whole demon parade, what I was seeing was it was a stagnant environment that was being created. He was, I don't want to say he was influenced, because I see that man as good, but there was like a slight influence there to where he, for whatever reason, set up these massive massive barriers. I feel he was getting telepathic communication from somebody to cordon off that, so that a portal could be created in there for these demons to come through.
Yeah.
And what happened was, when people would shut their doors, I had this vision of people barricading their doors and these reptilians coming, busting the doors down, to get at people. And it turned into like a feeding ground after a while. I keep seeing people being grabbed all the time.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of kidnapping back in the day.
Yeah,
by negative entities.
Yeah, I was seeing that very thing where I could see them busting the doors down and grabbing people.
Yeah.
And with humans like on chains, I kept seeing humans on chains and stuff like that. And I was being shown that taking down the bad guys knew to take down the spiritual barriers first. They knew to peck away at them, find all the weaknesses. They think in multi-dimensions. You think of the spindly Anunnaki. They know how to think in multi-mathematical levels. So they for anybody who's not using that type of protection, they can peck away at it fairly easily.
And they first start with separating you from yourself, separating you from your own innate skills, thinking that I need someone else to protect me. I need someone else to do something. And when you get separated from your own innate powers of reaching inside to do things, that's where vulnerable points come in.
Yes, and I see this is also why they set up nuclear energy as well. The bad guys did, because the magical barriers are definitely vulnerable to that type of energy, where it spreads through multi-dimensions. The protection spreads through multi-dimensions. It uses both numbers and intention. The nuclear isotope seems to just push like a battering ram through these barriers. And that's another level to this I hadn't seen before until you brought this history up. Let me see here. Yeah, and also the for and against was started. It seemed in this country when the families started fighting each other. That's also how the energy started to be collected. That's how you can initially tell when the spindlies came ashore, because when that started to take place. Even though before, I'm picking up that there's always like a scouting party that comes in before. This happened on other planets that were turned into farming worlds. No different than Japan. They wanted it because of it was isolated, and it was also a different energy. It was the Ontumban energy. They wanted to conquer it and convert it. So they influenced the man who created the barriers. What was his name again?
Seimei was the main guy.
Mm-hmm. But the one that blockaded Kyoto.
A man called Kamo.
Okay. I feel I feel like they visited him in a different form, and he was told create a blockade of energy, create it stagnant. He didn't discern correctly at that particular moment. It was just one little moment in time that he did this. I keep doing this motion. It's like he created these barriers in an opposite direction, like counterclockwise. Or they call it Widdershins in the British Isles. I keep seeing the reverse of this, to where it cracked open a dimensional portal, or made it possible for them to come in. And that was earlier on in history, but then later on
he tried to correct it.
He tried to correct that. He tried to correct that issue. And then when I keep forgetting the names. Seimei. When he came in, he definitely corrected this. And I'm definitely seeing it. He even knew which way to turn these vortexes correctly, to where it was pushing upward instead of drilling downward, in energy. It was like it was sinking, like the torsion field pulled down when the bad guys started coming. And
that's interesting that you say with the directions, because they say that in Kyoto, back when it was known as the Demon City, literally in the ancient texts from 1,000 years ago, it says the entities would rise from the earth. They would actually start to manifest from the ground upwards, and it was as if all the negative energy had been funneled in and it just become too much for the Earth, and then they were leaking
Yeah.
out of the Earth.
Yeah,
Almost.
because I keep seeing these when the barriers were created and surrounded Kyoto. I keep seeing the torsion field going down, and then the demons coming up out of that. So that actually makes sense. I was actually seeing them. They were underground. I believe some of them were already underground. Yes, some of them were already there. They had portaled in, but they couldn't get above certain magical barriers. So when that torsion field was reversed, it canceled out the good and allowed them to come in and corrupt the area. And I keep seeing that. I just keep seeing these images over and over again of these different reptilian types and different demonic types and Grim Reaper looking greys and stuff coming up out of there, and it's just etheric like mimickers and stuff floating all around all over the place. And that's what I keep seeing there. They had me hone in on Kyoto. It must be because we're going there next week. But
it's very interesting because I think again how subtle darkness is, and they're never going to take the blame. Their goal is that people aren't going to figure out what really happened. It's going to be subtle over time. You're not going to know. But an interesting thing developed here in more recent history, I think, with the attitude that we have to keep the foreigners out. No different than what's going on in the United States right now. We got to build a wall. I mean, so it's an interesting dynamic that they always will say they did it. You know what I mean? They'll get you thinking they did it, and they're responsible, or they're going to make it worse when they're already invaded into your area and you don't even know it.
Yeah, they're already there. They've already infiltrated.
They've been there, and it's a subtle, sleight hand trickery, can't see the man behind the curtain kind of thing going on, and it's been there for quite some time. But that's why it's so difficult.
Yeah.
Because and you don't see the sleight of hand that's going on. Darkness is very, very intelligent.
Well, For and Against wouldn't even manifest in the first place if it hadn't happened in the ether in the first place.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it just comes in like that. So, I heard this, I think I told you, when you first told me, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the origin story. I called it the origin story. The origin story of kind of how things tumbleweeded a bit, and then you always have I call it the chess move. You're always going to have the chess move of the light and dark because they're pretty equally matched. So the darkness comes in, has influenced somebody. Now you have a city full of demons, and then the light comes in, brings in another person who can kind of correct that, because you get to the point where that atmosphere is considered overage of darkness, and how do we balance that out? Well, we got to bring somebody onto the chessboard who knows how to work in countering that, and then the darkness does something else, and then the light does. It's this game kind of, and I hate to say that, but it really is kind of like a chess move after chess move, and then again coming to us now where it's not going to be so equally matched anymore, because again, we're moving into energies, we're moving into frequencies that the darkness cannot operate in. So we're meant to come out of this, and that's part of the reason we're not going to continually circle the drain. There's not going to be this constant back and forth. We are going to find our way out of it, because it's just bottom line meant to be.
Yes, what's also interesting when you were mentioning the Yorkai, or the Elven people, in somebody's read I did over a year ago where they had planned on going to Kyoto, I started looking into that, and she'd had a lifetime as one of these Yorkai. I saw the Elven people. They were a little shorter. They seemed like Syrian type, but they were purple like skin, purple and yellow and blue.
Sounds like Oni. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually saw her as one of these people, and the bad guys actually slipped into their dimensional layer when they invaded in, started grabbing several of these. I kept seeing the reptilians going in and abducting these Yorkai that were in there, trying to get them away, and I believe that was just prior to it becoming Demon City, because I saw these elven people were literally snatched in their dimensional layer. They couldn't get it. The reptilians then couldn't get into our frequency yet, until they were invited in, but they grabbed the other beings that were actually semi helping out first, that were on the other side of a veil, that were watching over Kyoto. I saw these beings watching them, and then I saw these bad guys just snatch them. And so I thought that was actually very, very interesting. I was also told that in what we've spoken about, the yield between dark and light, and how different factions yield to keep other people safe, or they think they're keeping other people safe. I'm actually seeing a consent being given to bring these beings in. Somebody was convinced that it was going to keep the land safe by striking a bargain with these beings, and then it ended up infecting the land more. But there's a yield going on now to a minor degree with these beings now with the nuclear energy. That's how I'm seeing it. They're doing the same crap just now. The same dealings they came in with. But let me see here. One of the Untumbans that came through at the lecture that we had on Untumban in Japanese history, he actually came through at the beginning when we were starting here, and he was actually concurring with everything you were saying, and comparing it to what we were speaking about. I believe he was there. I believe Taikan was his name, and he came through at the lecture, but I believe he used a different name in that time frame. When you kept saying, God, I keep forgetting these names. The white magician, Seimei. That seemed to strike a chord, but for whatever reason, that name keeps leaving my head. They keep pulling the name out of my head. So I believe this Taikan is Seimei.
I see.
Because whenever you brought that name up, the bad guys were trying to pull it out of my head, and he was nodding like this. He kept doing this when you kept saying Seimei. So I believe that's him. So that I find that very fascinating. And I'm going to reconfirm. Is that you, Taikan? Or are you Seimei? He did this, yeah. So why did you change names from Taikan to Seimei? I understand. He says it was necessary because there's power in a name. He switched over to that name, so that if the bad guys would call out to that name, they weren't attaching to his higher essence. So if they called out his actual sound tones of his name, Taikan, they would have entangled all of him. But if he used Seimei as like a barrier, his name Seimei, they attach to that, and it doesn't do anything to the overall being. So I can actually see that. Yeah, I can actually see him. He at first I thought he was dressed as like a samurai, but he's dressed as like a magician. So he has like a striped kimono or gi, I believe they're called. Yeah, that has these interesting stripe patterns that are going down this way. And he's saying, the colors and lines in the outfits had meaning as well, and also the plants. If they put plant imagery, they created some of these miniature barriers in clothes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, in clothes, and the way the clothes are shaped, the way it is grounded, and the way it's shaped. It wasn't just style; it was magic. And the way the swords are shaped, the way they're created, the way the armor's created, everything is either mimics a bad guy to push them away, like mirrors, or keep something out. He's saying you can create lines on yourself to sever entanglements.
Okay, that makes sense.
And this is. He said we have something similar when we do tattoos and images on ourselves, but geometric lines, like in the form of, like, say, kanji, spelling out certain words, and also geometric forms that have been considered satanic now in American culture. These things are very, very necessary. They were misused, like in our Washington D.C. when they laid out the city for basically the Archontic forces to use that geometry. The good and the bad both use it. So he's saying the numbers are neutral. It's the intention that's put into it and the substances that are put into it. And let me see here. All right. Did you want to say anything on this, Taikon? Okay. Briefly, because of why? Because of entanglements and different grid line corruptions, okay, that are being rectified. You're still doing this to this day, aren't you? Correct.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, he hasn't stopped trying to keep the magical barriers up.
Wow.
Yeah, so he never died. He never died. Even if they showed him as dying, he never died. So, well, I know that's true of everyone, but okay. Now he's giving me crap. Okay, let's see. He has a dry humor. He just comes through and goes, "This is true of everyone." Like this. That's how he says. All right. Let's see. Are you going to use your actual name, Taikon or Seimei? Meh, either one. Okay. Okay. Seimei is the name I used then, as was explained, as a barrier. This is why your guides and galactics sometimes use pseudonyms, you would say, to block such inference type magic. The lines and grids of what you perceive as just the enemies is not so. They stole these techniques in order to assimilate or learn them. They study numbers, they study logic, and they study geometry. But what they do not study is intention and heart space, since that is impossible. This gives humans the advantage over machines and decrepit forms, such as what you would refer to as demons. The demon city, as you have called it in your history, was a bastardized chakra point, you would say, of the earth. The enemy wanted to close it off so that the earth would become far more corrupted. You see, the Ontumban culture, of which I am from, introduced Japan at an earlier stage to help keep the energies raised and balanced. The enemy would have none of this. So they did their slow, usual invasion through treachery, dissent, and for and against. But to start with, it was consent on a minute level, out of a desire to help and aid, such as Kamo thought. I did see this and wanted to fix these barriers. So this is why this was repaired, or he was made to help repair this, but he too learned from this mistake. However, it had become overage and a feeding ground, a nesting ground, you would call it. Portals and dark threads and intertwining quantum entanglements became the regular thing, you would say, in Kyoto. When the barriers were open and all the negative entities spilled out, they attempted to keep in positivity. But that too became a form of corruption because they ensnared what they had no right to ensnare. So those entities were allowed to come and go as they pleased. You see, they were some of what you would call the Yorkai or the Elven people, which were snared, as he has said, by these reptilian and dark Anunnaki Archontic forms. They were snared by them to prevent them from protecting humanity, but They were also ensnared by humanity to protect humanity against what they perceived as evil. However, in committing these darker actions, they allowed for a consent, which led to even more corruption later on. This is a subtlety that escapes people. They think they can ensnare good beings to help protect them, when in fact all they have to do is ask, and those good beings show themselves, even in subtle ways. Eventually, when the dark and light, as you perceive it, magicians took their places upon the giant chessboard at the time, they did not realize, even in good intentions, that they were participating in the for and against. They were feeding the beast, as you would say. The geometry spun in the opposite direction than they had intended. You see, when these generals warred each other, what they did not realize is they were forming a negative, you would say, vortex, as they danced around each other in the incorrect manner. But as the energies were balanced, this began to cease. This angered the dark forces, and they began to infiltrate through other means. Eventually, in the age of your World War II, they began to even get a greater foothold after they had already infiltrated the royal bloodline, as you have stated correctly, I might add. Eventually, the sites you know of as Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, giving the enemy an even greater foothold, you see. Barrier magic that still existed on those two spots was partially obliterated by the two explosions. You see, these reptilians, Draconian Empire, and Archontic forces have infiltrated the United States. They came in using your American soldiers and your American airmen to drop these bombs to fight even more of the Ontumban magic. Eventually, later on, creating nuclear power sites to do the same. This is all I can explain at the moment for this, but I am open to questions.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful that you've come in and speak to us today. Something I said earlier, I really would like your comment on, because it appears to me that there certainly is a pattern to what has happened basically to all cultures and societies, of how they come in and infiltrate, how they separate you from yourself, thinking you can't do things from within, how they then infiltrate religious aspects to separate you further from yourself and to rely on others. Mm-hmm. So I just am curious about your thoughts on, because it seems to be the same pattern that's played out over and over and over again.
Yes, indeed. They convince you you have no power, that you must worship a god to give you your power. You must see your power outside of yourself. This is a form of, as you would say, divide and conquer. They divide and conquer the self, then they divide and conquer a culture in the very same way, causing them to be the servants of theirs where they cannot reach. This is a pattern they've used since the beginning of your histories, or recorded histories, even into what you know of as mythology, which is just distorted histories as well. Other galactic cultures fell into this snare as well. This is why we always encourage the inner work must be done. See yourself as a sovereign being and not at the, you would say, behest of a godhead or god force. No loving God force would ever expect worship or to see that power outside of yourself. You are that God force. You are a spark of what you would refer to as prime creator. You have the power within you. You have it in your own hands, in your own minds, and in your own hearts. You do not need the power of some God, because you are that God.
Thanks. So since you are in Tumbin, and what we tried to tell people in Japan Galactic History is that long before even this time, the Japanese lance was brought in, was a part of Antampa, radiates at a higher frequency anyway, obviously with some plants and trees and that came as well. Knowing, because again, this is an experience of going from darkness to light, that there was going to be a challenge to it, to see how well it would take the challenge of darkness trying to override it. So my curious is, as an Antumban who's seen it all, how did you guys do? How did it go? Did you did the lands provide 50% of their radiation higher frequency? Was it dampened, hardly any? How did it work? How did it go with the thought process of bringing this land in?
For one, we knew when to stand back and we knew when to react. That was part of the key to integrating ourselves into your histories. We knew our own vibration would have us seen as deities if we did not dampen our own, you would say, inner magic slightly. You see things in forms of percentages, but we see things in forms of energy flows. There were days and weeks when the filtration of the plants and trees had to work harder, and other days and weeks where it had a much easier time. If those plants and trees, such as your cherry blossom, had not been there, for instance, or bonsai, or bamboo, or other plants, the negative forces would have had a much tighter stranglehold on the land. We placed these in certain spots around Japan to ensure that the balance of nature always won out over the balance of corruption.
That's great. So it's really must have been very interesting for you guys to watch that, to actually watch that over time. How did it work? How did it do? So the next part to that question are the descendants. Because, again, we've said that the Asian cultures are the descendants of the Antumbans and other mixes that came along. And that things like telepathy wasn't completely lost, because people do it more here than they think. My theory, and this is just a theory, so I'm curious what you think, is because the lands didn't get as corrupted as other areas, because new energies are coming in, because the people of the culture are in still a little bit of that telepathic way of communication, I still think a little bit more unity of thought potentially because of it. That, it wouldn't surprise me to see many things coming out of Japan that are going to help unify the rest of the world, because they didn't seem to lose it all or as much as others. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yes, when the Rothschilds and other groups attempted to alter the state of our DNA codes, they failed, because by integrating their, you would say, spindly DNA within our own, our codes and the codes that were generated upon Antumba within our energy, and this also means the landmass itself, began to alter their codes. In time, those codes will eventually wipe out the, you would say, dominance factor, and be able to filter the Rothschild and other Cabal lineage DNAs back into your bulk of humanity. Not necessarily through us, mind you. That we're not saying our DNA is special over any others. We're just saying that particular energy, as it spreads, will alter the Cabal DNA to be less hostile as it reintegrates back into the human race. These other Cabal families were once one and can be again. The only things that are removed are ones that are so corrupted that they can never be reintegrated back into the human genome. This is where we and other groups come in, removing those that you've never even heard of. The ones you've heard of, such as the Rothschilds and other cabal families, are, you would call them puppets. However, they have more of a role to play than they think. They are just going at the behest of their Martian counterparts. But this will actually soon end, and that DNA be refiltered back into the mass genome.
Thank you. Do you have any questions coming?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Abin or Seimei, for being here. And I'm very, very curious to find out, maybe a little bit before your time, what was the relationship between Ontumba and the House of Molecular Cellular Solids, House of M, the lineage of the Odin, Anu, and Enlil, Enki, these people? Because I understand Susanoo was one of those guys from Mesopotamia, but then Amaterasu was an Ontamban, but they resided on Japan and they were seen as Shinto deities at the time. So what was the relationship there?
The relationship between Asgard, you would know as Maldek, and Ontumba was quite frequent. There were intermarrying with some of the cultures there. There were Ontumbans that lived on Maldek and Maldekians that lived on Ontumba. You see, both cultures traded with each other and merged technologies with each other. There was a close relationship between both cultures. So when our world had to enter your dimensional layer and Maldek was no more, there was still the merging of technologies. You see, the technology we carry today is a merging between Asgardian tech and our own. So when we came to Earth, or the remnants of the two cultures came to Earth, you saw these relationships and these dynamics continue in Japan.
Very interesting, thank you.
So I'm just going to leave it with, do you have any other words of wisdom you would like to share with the audience?
Only simply that the power of self is not as selfish as you would think. It is more selfless, because by improving yourself, you are able to help improve the world around you and create magic of your own. I am known as Taikan, also known as Seimei, and I thank you. Oh.
Thank you.
Oh.
I think it's brilliant. You never know what's going to come in.
Yeah.
You never know.
Wow. Okay.
So how does it make you feel now to kind of reflect upon the stories?
It all makes sense, and particularly when Seimei-san was saying about where the ancient people in Japan imprisoning the good beings. I didn't even say that to Chris, so that's very, very interesting, because this is something that is all over Japan, where they also imprison kami, and the kami is seen as sort of like demigods, if you like, but of the positive variety. And but the understanding was that some of these positive entities, they have no concept of the human physical 3D dynamics, so they might ask something of humans that are unreasonable, but that doesn't mean they're negative.
Right.
They do that now too.
They do it now.
They do it now. Yeah, like what we were talking about last night, is they have no concept of money,
Yes.
at the skull. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they should be imprisoned onto a land by some people who think they're white magicians.
Right.
So that makes total sense, and it's exactly what I've been researching as well. So that was mind blowing to hear that from Abeno Seimei personally. You know, as a Japanese person that studied into this.
That's nice.
Cool.
And the whole thing with the Mesopotamian influence into Japan, because the three treasures, the sword, the mirror, and the jewel, that most of that comes from Mesopotamia. And now that all makes sense because of this relationship between Ontamba and Asgard. And it just all makes sense now.
Oh, good.
From that perspective.
Right.
I don't understand everything, but that certainly makes sense.
Oh, good.
That's good.
That's great.
Yeah, and I even read The Viking in his session, and that's where I found out the two cultures had actually played a role together, technologically, physically, intermarrying. So that's where I discovered that portion of it, and then Seimei actually expanded on it slightly of how they kept going together. So that's actually very interesting. Now I've actually enjoyed this one.
Yeah,
so,
this has been great.
Yeah. So any final words, Yaski?
No. All I can say is I think you're totally right when you said even in the culture of Onmyoji there was light and dark, and it's just further confirmation of that.
Thank you. Yeah. So this has been a very, very good episode of the lifting today. This is episode 70 actually. So thank you everybody for watching this episode. Joanna?
Yes, that's it. And we hope you guys have a great time. To mark this, which I can't remember, what's today's date? We are at April 12th?
12th, I believe.
I think we're on April 12th, 2019, guys. And this was done here in Japan, which it's still April 11th in the United States, by the way. But anyway, we guys will see you later. Take care. See you next time.
Bye-bye.